Okay, let's solve some of those trickier ones that are in that homework assignment. So we're going to start with the smaller ones. We're going to move up to the bigger ones. So right here, my video cut out and I had already done some of them, but we take that 3 and we give it to everything that's in here. So it's 3 to the third, x to the fourth to the third. When we raise one power to another power, we multiply our exponents. So this becomes 3 to the third, x to the 12th. Because 3 to the third is pretty easy to simplify, we're going to do 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. And there's our final answer right there. For this one, we're going to distribute that -4 to everything in here. But a negative on our exponent tells us that we're on the wrong side of the fraction bar. So all of this stuff that is currently on the top of a fraction bar, even if we can't see it, belongs on the bottom. So I'm going to raise everything to the fourth and I'm going to move it to the bottom. So 2 to the fourth, x to the third to the fourth, y to the second to the fourth. Remember, multiply those exponents. Now, because we can do this 2 to the fourth pretty easily, we're going to rewrite it as 16. So that's 1 over 16, x to the 12th, y to the 8th. We go, we're going to share that 3 with everybody in the parentheses because it's on the parentheses. So x to the third is x to the 9th, 3 times 3. Y to the -2 to the third is y to the -6. -2 times 3 is -6. But remember what that negative means. I am on the wrong side of the fraction bar. So I'm going to rewrite it. The x to the 9th has a positive exponent. It needs to stay where it is up top. Again, we can imagine that over 1, it's not drawn there, but everything's over 1 really. And so that stays where it is, but this moves to the bottom. All right, now we got this one. It's more of a division problem now. So we're going to try to put things together. Remember that when we divide, we subtract the exponents. So x to the third over x to the second is x to the 3 minus 2, which is a plain old x to the 1. Y to the 5th over y to the 1. And remember that 1 might not be written there. So if they don't tell us it's to the first, we assume it's to the first. Y to the 5th divided by y to the 1st is y to the 5 minus 1, aka y to the 4th. And we're finished with that one. We could write it as just plain x y to the 4th because we don't have to have the to the 1st. But either one of those would be a right answer. Okay, now we got this guy, and there's a lot of different ways to do this. So I'm going to start by taking this x to the -3rd, and I'm going to move it to the bottom where it belongs because that negative exponent is telling me I am not where I belong. So I like my first step to be to change everything to positives in this kind of situation, but that's preference. All right, so I'm going to put that x to the 3rd from here is going to move to the bottom. There was already an x to the 2nd and a y to the 3rd on the bottom. Okay, now we just decide what we want to take care of. Do we want to deal with the x's first or the y's? I like to go in alphabetical order, but the order is not really going to matter. X to the 3rd times x to the 2nd, like bases mean add the exponents. So we're not raising a power to a power, we're multiplying those. So that's x to the 5th. And then it still has 1 y on the top and 3 y's on the bottom. So I need to try to combine my y's. Now those are being divided. So that y to the 1st, and when I divide, I subtract. So I go y to the 1st minus y to the 3rd gives me y to the -2nd. So that really means it belongs on the bottom. So we're going to get the x to the 5th right where it is. You can also write it out like y to the 3rd is y times y times y. And if one of them cancels out, it leaves 2 on the bottom. Or you can subtract top to bottom. If you get a positive answer, you put your answer on the top. If you get a negative answer, you put your answer on the bottom. Because there's nothing left in the numerator, I'm just going to put a 1 as a placeholder. We could, if we wanted to, rewrite this answer like this. That's kind of an aside. We probably wouldn't. We would leave it like this as our right answer. But remember that those could be rewritten this way if we want it all in one level instead of in a fraction. Because if we move them where they don't belong up to the top, we can just put a negative to show they actually belong in the bottom. Again, you'd probably leave it right there, but just extra lesson. All right, now they're getting pretty fancy and complicated. There's a lot in there to do. So I'm going to start with everything that's in those parentheses, and I'm going to neaten it out. So negative 2 to the 5th is negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. That comes out negative 32. When we do it, you could put it in a calculator. And then x to the 3rd. And then we have y to the 3rd and z to the 3rd, because everything in there gets that to the 3rd. So I just kind of handed it out like handing out papers in class. 3 to the 2nd would give me a 9. And then we have x, y to the 2nd. I'm not trying to save paper. All right, let's combine what we can now. Negative 32 over 9 is our number part. Those are just plain numbers, and those don't simplify. Only 3 goes into here, only 2's go into there. So we're not going to be able to simplify that anymore, so I'm just going to rewrite them. And now I'm going to look at my x's. X to the 3rd on the top, x to the 1st on the bottom, so I do 3 minus 1 is 2. When we subtract that way, top to bottom, if we get a positive number, remember we put our answer in the top. If you get a negative number, you're going to put your answer in the bottom. All right, then we got 3 minus 2. Those are our y's getting combined. 3 minus 2 is 1. That's a positive answer, so 1y in the top. The other way is to write it out. Y times y times y. Y times y. 2 of those can cancel out, and it will just leave 1 in the top. Okay, now I'm going to get stupid, and I'm actually going to change my problem because I want one that goes negative just so you can see one. So let's make that something big on the bottom, like 6. If we subtract top to bottom, we go 3 minus 6, which gives me a negative 3. So that means that z to the 3rd actually belongs, whoops, I just said it wrong. Actually belongs in the bottom because we got a negative. So 3 minus 6 gives me negative 3, so I'm going to put that in the bottom. Your other way is you can write them out. Z times z times z. Z times z times z. Z times z. Is that 6 of them? Yes. 3 of them cancel out, and that leaves 3 in the bottom. Once we only have one x term, one y term, we don't have any else to combine, we're finished with it right there. All right, 2 more. So now I'm going to take this negative 2, and I'm going to distribute it. It's not really distributing, but it's a good way to think of it. To everything in there. So it becomes 2 to the negative 2. X to the negative 3rd to the negative 2nd. Negative 3 times negative 2. That's power to a power. So we multiply those exponents. We get x to the 6th. And then on the bottom, 3 to the negative 2nd. X to the negative 2 to the negative 2 gives me x to the positive 4. Negative 2 times negative 2. All right, now I like to personally move everything that's in the wrong place where it belongs. So the x to the 6th is where it belongs, but that 2 to the negative 2nd, that negative tells me wrong side, so I move it down here. That 3 to the negative 2nd is wrong side. Whoops, now it doesn't need a negative anymore, now that I've moved it where it belongs. The x to the 4th is where it belongs. The order that you do this stuff, again, doesn't matter that much. So now I'm going to rewrite that 3 to the 2nd as 9, but you could have done that in an earlier step if you were in the mood. The 2 to the 2nd is 4. And now I can combine these x's. Since I have an x in the top and an x in the bottom, x to the 6th, x to the 4th. When they're divided, I subtract the exponents. I get 2. That's a positive 2, so my x to the 2nd goes in the top. 9/4 doesn't simplify. You can do that in your calculator if you use but you just do 9 divided by 4 and it gives you a decimal. Change that to a fraction and it will always give the fraction to you in simplest form. So you can let your calculator simplify fractions. 5 over 15 does simplify. It gives us 1/3. X to the negative 2nd. I'm going to leave for just a second while I distribute this stuff. So I get x to the negative 1st, y to the negative 1st, and then on the bottom I have x to the 4th, y to the 5th. All right, I got a lot of x's to put together. So I'm going to take that 1/3 because I know I'm kind of finished with those numbers, and I'm going to start putting my x's together. What I get is x to the negative 2nd times x to the negative 1st, so I add those exponents. That gives me x to the negative 3rd. And then I'm going to copy everything because I'm trying to be thorough. Equals. Now, I'm going to combine the x's that are on different sides of the fraction bar. Negative 3 minus 4 gives me x to the negative 7, which means my answer belongs, still copying that 1/3 along, in the bottom. I'm going to get an x to the 7th in the bottom. You could also, if we detour over here, you could have moved that x to the 3rd to the bottom, because remember that negative means it belongs in the bottom, and then added them, and you'd have gotten to the same place. Same with this y. So I can do -1 minus 5 and get -6, which means my answer belongs in the bottom. Or I could have moved that down. Like I could, because it has that negative, it belongs in the bottom, and then add the exponents and put it right there. So here's our final answer. A lot of different ways to do some of these. The order that I did stuff isn't necessarily the only way. So ask a lot of questions if you get stuck on any of these.